Welcome to I'm Your Target Demographic. Welcome to our first ever weekly roundup. Now, what this is there's a bunch of shows, movies, topics that I want to discuss that maybe aren't worth doing a whole video. And so every Friday, I'm going to try to compile these things into an update. So if you saw an episode of a TV show, you said, wow, the latest Game of Thrones was really cool, let's talk about it. I'll be here to talk with you. I don't always have nerdy friends to talk about pop culture stuff or what video games I'm playing. So today, you're my friends, and we're going to talk about these things. So you may disagree with me. There may be shows that I love that you don't love. So down in the comments, you can debate, disagree, agree. Whatever you want to do, we're going to talk about it. So each week is going to have kind of a slate of topics. If there's something you want to talk about the next week, let me know in the comments and we'll do our best. Some of you maybe don't know that I do review movies and TV. I don't usually do YouTube videos about them, but over on IAYTD on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I post reviews. I watch about 70 to 80 movies a year in theaters. So every time I see a new movie, I put out a review. Games I finished, a new season of a show is finished. So make sure you go over to those places to see all my reviews. And then some of them are going to make their way here for us to discuss. So the topics this week, right over here. So we're going to start by talking about She-Hulk, which just finished season 1. We're going to talk about my thoughts on that. We're going to talk about Rings of Power, which also just finished season 1. And then we're going to talk about some sitcoms that I've been watching that if you want something a little bit more lighthearted, I've got a couple recommendations. We're going to talk a little bit about Game of Thrones because it will be finishing soon, and so we'll do a more thorough discussion when that season ends. But I wanted just to tell you what I think so far. We're also going to talk about some games that I've been playing, and so I'm going to talk about a game called Pathfinder Kingmaker, which there's a sequel that just came out, and so I was playing the first one. I'll give you a couple thoughts on that. And then I'm going to give you a sneak peek into videos I'm writing, things I'm working on, what's coming next down the pipeline. So let's start with She-Hulk. She-Hulk is a Disney Plus series based on the long-running comic book character of Jennifer Walters' She-Hulk. Now, She-Hulk is very divisive. A lot of people don't like it. I put out a poll for YouTube subscribers to fill out, and a lot of you weren't even interested in the show. And I get that. It is definitely not for everyone. So what I liked about She-Hulk is that it is very different from everything. There's so much Marvel content that it can feel a little samey at times. Things feel similar. It always kind of culminates the same way. And She-Hulk is really unique in that it doesn't follow those things. And her breaking the fourth wall, she will often tell the audience, you might expect this thing to happen, but we're not going to do that. Or you're only watching this show because this person is guest starring. Like, they know what the audience is thinking, what the audience will like and not like about it, and they address it, which is really smart. And this idea of the fourth wall culminates in a season finale that is buck wild. That is, like, I was just jaw dropped watching this finale, like thinking about like the implications, like the process to write this scene was probably really wild. So I'm not going to spoil too much because a lot of you have not seen it. But if you're looking for something different, if you're looking for a half-hour comedy, kind of a romantic comedy, this is going to be that. The fact that she is a superhero or has super abilities factors very little into the show. There are not a lot of fight scenes. It's not action. It is about kind of a woman coping with these new abilities she has, and what does that mean for her love life, her work life. So it is really interesting. And since they're only 20-something minutes an episode, it goes fast. My critiques is that the episodes are pretty standalone. Something will happen that is totally contained in that 20-something minutes, and then it may never come up again. or it may not move the plot forward. And so there are a lot of kind of just doing their own thing episodes when maybe we're used to a series that is an arc, and each episode moves that story forward. This is not that. The other maybe complaint about the show is that the CGI is not always great, especially of She-Hulk herself. She's on screen a lot and she doesn't always look great. So with that said, I review things on a 1 through 5 scale using a picture of my head. And so I gave this 4 out of 5 heads. I thought it was fun. I thought it was unique. I think it's for maybe a different sector of the MCU that hasn't maybe gotten that sort of romantic comedy yet. So if that does not sound like your cup of tea, luckily you don't have to watch it, right? There's so much out there that you can watch Werewolf by Night and that's your thing. You can watch She-Hulk, that's your thing. There's stuff for everyone. And so for me, I thought it was a 4 out of 5. I liked it. I didn't love it. I liked it. Now up next, we're going to talk about Rings of Power. Now this is again another very divisive show where a vocal minority are so upset about this. And I don't understand why. Let me give you some context about my history with Lord of the Rings. Growing up, I grew up with the animated Hobbit, the Rankin and Bass movie, and then I grew up with the Bakshi animated Lord of the Rings, which is unfinished. It's the first part of the journey, and then they just never made the rest. And then my parents were huge Lord of the Rings fans, and so I remember growing up with these books. These are original from the 70s, I think. And I grew up reading these, and I still read them. And Lord of the Rings has just been a part of my life for a long time. When the movies came out, I saw each movie in theaters 7 times. Loved them. I made that my entire personality. So when Rings of Power was announced, I was hesitant, like everyone. I was not sure. They were boasting that it was the most expensive show ever made, but does that translate to an actually good show? Let me tell you maybe what the most important thing for me was that they got right, and that is the sense of wonder. Watching Rings of Power multiple times an episode, I lose myself in the imagery, the production, the world that they've created here. They took a footnote that was, Tolkien wrote, oh, this is a thing that happened, and they're fleshing out into these stories. And yes, they're filling in some gaps. They're inventing some storylines that are not from his texts. That's fine. We would not say the same thing with any other franchise. There are Star Treks that are happening now without Gene Roddenberry. There are changes that they're making, things that they're inventing, but they're capturing the wonder perfectly. That when an army rides on to the battlefield and you just look at their armor and the helmets that are just extravagant, and the fight sequences are inventive, and I love it. And so, spoiler alert, not about the content of the show, but about my thoughts on the show, is I think it's fantastic. I think it's whole new stories. That we may know how they eventually end, but the journey there is fascinating. These characters that sometimes they're inventing are interesting, and I'm invested in them. During the finale, I'm tearing up about, these Hobbit-esque Harfoots and their journey. There's mysteries about who is going to play what role in what's to come that keeps you engaged. Again, the fight scenes I think are really incredible. Now, some people critique them and say that they're ridiculous and over the top, but have you not seen the Lord of the Rings movies? The things that Legolas did in those films are just as ridiculous, if not more ridiculous, than what we're seeing in this show. I think it's fantastic. the sets, the production, everything is incredible. So I'm very happy with it. People do have complaints. I think some are fair. I think the complaints about sometimes maybe dialogue isn't written as well. There is some CGI that doesn't maybe always look great. But I think there are complaints about changing the source and things that shouldn't have happened yet. That happens in the third age, not the second age. I think that's all stuff that is going to happen when you adapt anything. Where were those people when they changed something about Iron Man's origin? People don't care, right? It makes it a better story. So some of these changes, I think the complaints are unfounded or exaggerated. So I myself love the show. So for me, as a longtime Tolkien fan, I gave it a 5 out of 5. Season 1, at least. We'll see if the next seasons can continue this journey, can continue to keep things up. But I am a huge fan, and I loved every minute of it. Now, for just a minute, I want to transition to half-hour sitcoms that are probably on more traditional cable TV, but then you can watch streaming on, things like Hulu. So there's 2 recommendations I want to give for people that are maybe looking for a new show and maybe haven't given these shows a shot. The first recommendation I want to give is Abbott Elementary, which hopefully someone has told you about because it is fantastic. And it just won a bunch of Emmys. It's a fantastic, original, creative, hilarious comedy. So it just started season 2 a couple weeks back. So now is the perfect time to finish through season 1, start season 2, and be caught up. So if you're looking for a comedy, Abbott Elementary is fantastic. Another comedy that's been out for a couple years now, but I still don't really see people talk about, is something called Home Economics. Home Economics is Topher Grace making his return to the half-hour comedy, and his family. And so each one is at a different rung in the ladder of socioeconomic status, right? And so there's one sibling that's kind of really struggling, there's one that's like average, and there's one that's really rich. So that's why it's called Home Economics. Really funny. I see a lot of myself in the Topher Grace character, and so almost every episode I'm like, that's a joke I would have made. And so I think that's a really funny show. So that's been out, I think it's on the 3rd season right now, so there's a little bit more to get through. But if you're looking for something really funny, charming, easy to kind of put on and just watch, in the background or whatever, Home Economics is a really solid choice. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon. So next week, we'll do our full review because I believe the last episode is this Sunday. And so next week, I'll give you my entire detailed thoughts and a rating for the show. But in a nutshell, I'm really enjoying it. There's a lot of Rings of Power versus Game of Thrones talk, and I'm not going to have that because they're 2 totally different shows. Game of Thrones is very much, as always, the shock value of how many characters can they kill in an episode, how gruesome can they do it. They're very much R-rated, where Rings of Power is clearly a family show, for good or worse. So Game of Thrones is just very different. But I'm loving the season. There are some complicated factors that maybe make it hard for casual viewers to get into. The fact that almost every episode jumps in time makes it difficult to keep up. It makes it difficult to remember characters that are already confusing to remember, that you finally get down, okay, that's Rhaenyra. And then the next episode, it's a different actress playing her. Or kids that you see them young, you see them teen, you see them young adult. And you're trying to remember who everyone is, and the names are very, very similar. And they're also similar to people in the original Game of Thrones show. So it gets just really complicated, and I think that might be hard for people that they're not reading the wiki afterwards. They're not reading, they're casual, and they're just going to watch the episode, and they're like, I don't know what's going on. Why is that such a big deal? So I think there is a barrier to entry for House of the Dragon, But those of you that are willing to invest in, okay, I'm going to rewatch these episodes. I'm going to turn captions on so I can catch every name. I think if you're willing to put in a little bit of extra work, it's an exceptional show. The other thing that makes it tricky is with these time jumps, I don't know if it always, it's basically a greatest hits album where it'll jump to the next big moment. Where in the original Game of Thrones, it would take a season to get to the big moment at the end of season 1. Right? Or it would take another season to get to the battle that this thing happens. Where in House of the Dragon, each episode is those typically end of season moments. And so it's a little tough. You lose some of the buildup. You lose the investment in the characters. So when someone does die, you maybe didn't have as much time with them. You maybe didn't even remember what their name was, and now they're burned alive. And so you lose some of that. So I kind of wish it was a very standard show, a linear show, that would have built up those moments a little bit, where now it feels like they're hurrying to get to certain moments. So we'll see next week if they manage to nail the landing on season 1. But overall, I'm really enjoying it. So maybe let me know your thoughts about House of the Dragon. So next week, maybe I'll shout out some of your comments. So the last thing I really wanted to talk about is a game I've been playing, because I do a lot of video game stuff. I'm constantly playing new games, and I didn't really have a venue for how to discuss them. So on this show, I will talk about the games I'm playing each week and what I like and don't like, and recommendations. So let me talk about Pathfinder Kingmaker. This is an older game that originally came out for PC and then made its way to some consoles. So I played on PS5, but it was a PS4 port, I think. So this is basically an RPG, classic standard RPG that you can either play in real time with pause, so you can pause and issue commands, or you can play turn-based combat. And that's typically how I played, so that I could control each character in my party and give them an action, say, okay, you're going to do this, and then this person's going to do this. It gives you a lot of control over what people are doing, where real-time combat just gets messy. And I would lose track of who's doing what. It just gets so messy. Now, I loved my experience with this game. Great story. Choices were really interesting. I logged probably about 70 hours, but then I had to quit playing. And this is such a shame that something so small made this game unplayable. Every couple hours, it would hard crash back to the PlayStation loading screen, or the main menu. Game would just crash. The game autosaves occasionally when you enter a new space, a dungeon, a new city. But let's say you enter a dungeon and you spend an hour and a half going through it, fighting things, crashes, you're back at the beginning. So you have to remember to save constantly. Sometimes I would, and so when it would crash, obviously I spent so many hours on the game that it crashed a lot. And I was, okay, we'll do this part again. Try to be patient. Now, there's something else in the game that is extremely broken, that paired with these hard crashings, this game was not enjoyable anymore. And there is a kingdom management tool in this game where you control the city, you have to make decisions, you have to build buildings, you have to say, I want to pursue this course of action for my city and how, the decisions we're going to make. Now, this gets incredibly annoying. So there is an option to ignore it, to say, I don't want to make these decisions. But I thought it was such a cool idea at the beginning to say, okay, I want to really focus on military strength, and so I'm going to make these choices, I'm going to build these buildings. That sounded interesting. So I committed to it. But what happens is everything in this game is based on a die roll. So it's based on, out of a D20, oh, you failed because you only rolled a 5, things like that. And if you fail some of these decisions, you say, we're going to focus on military, so here's what I want to do. It rolls in the background, it tells you failed. These things snowball to a point where it gets harder and harder to succeed on these rolls. So I was at a point in my kingdom where it says, how do you want to handle these protesting civilians? And I say, okay, I want to do this. And it tells you your chance of success, and it said 0. For almost every choice I was making, it was like, cool, you want to try to handle this and redeem your city that is now crumbling and about to be destroyed? You have 0% chance of this working. So not only was the game crashing, but I was now essentially buried so deep in this kind of mini game about your kingdom that I was failing everything. And these are both things that really you can't fix. I'm not going to go back spending 70 something hours. I'm not going to go back and start over or go back to a save 40 hours ago to try to correct this course. So I gave up. Now I do have the sequel, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, I think it's called, loaded up, ready to go. I'm going to take some time off because 70 hours is a lot in that genre. So I'm currently playing 2 Point Campus, which is like a simulation on like a college campus. So next week I can give you some thoughts on that. And then I'll return to Pathfinder after a little break, cleanse the palate, and go back to that. So let me know your thoughts if you've played either of those Pathfinder games, or if you've played 2 Point Campus. Next week we'll engage in that discussion. So that is pretty much it. I just wanted to share what I've been watching, what I've been doing, what I've been playing. Works in progress if you're curious for a look at the future. So I'm working on a couple videos now. I'm working on some Guardians of the Galaxy videos with a fellow YouTuber named Jay from Fancy Geeks. So I'm going to contribute to a video he's working on. He's going to contribute to a video I'm working on. That'll be in preparation for Guardians of the Galaxy 3, coming out, I think, early next year. But we'll have those up ready soon. I'm also working on a video about misinformation. And so, that's kind of been a hot topic around elections and politics, the ability to spread misinformation. I'm going to do essentially a timeline of what this looks like. Legally, what are the laws about misinformation and slander and libel, and the kind of rise of magazines that would just blatantly lie, and what did that look like, and why do people believe or not believe them, leading into the era of social media, and kind of what's the state of misinformation now, and what, if someone is blatantly lying about something, are there consequences? What does that look like? And so I'm diving into that a little bit. That's kind of the hefty video that I'm working on now. And then I've got some smaller word up videos and kind of smaller things I'm working on. A lot of you follow me for religion videos. And so I have a couple that I'm starting to work on, but I always need an expert, someone that's in those religions to help me write them. So if any of you are of a faith that I haven't covered yet, and you're interested in helping me kind of review the script, review the video before it goes live, let me know. I would appreciate that. So that is kind of what we're working on. Next week, again, we'll talk about Game of Thrones. We'll talk about 2 Point Campus. And I think I'm seeing Black Adam on Sunday, and so we'll talk about that the next week to give, I guess, folks a week to watch it, and then we can kind of spoiler talk Black Adam. So hopefully you found this interesting. We're aiming for every Friday, and we'll see how that pans out. And thanks for watching.